One second. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another session of ILA Dialogues. Today, we have with us Advocate Shivangi Prasad. She specializes in laws related to sexual harassment, gender, and child rights. She is the co-founder at Posh at Work, a legal psychology firm which is also impaneled by Ministry of Women and Child Development, Government of India since February 2017. As a part of Posh at Work, she is assisting 300 plus organizations on compliance with laws against sexual harassment at workplace and acting as an external member of internal committee of 20 plus organizations. She has handled 200 plus complaints of sexual harassment, conducted 250 plus trainings, awareness sessions involving a lakh plus individuals. She has spoken at various events, including Women Economic Forum in Kerala and Bangalore, etc. She's also a part. She was also a part of. She was also part of the discussion with United Nations Women and National Commission for Women on Sexual Harassment at Workplace. She's also on the advisory board of CARPAL, which stands for Center for Research, Protection, and Advancement of LGBTQIA plus community. She has co-authored a book titled Handbook on the Law of Sexual Harassment, both editions published by Thomson Reuters. Today, Shivangi will be speaking on understanding sexual harassment at workplace in the new normal. Welcome, Shivangi. We're really glad to have you on board today.
Thank you so much, Abhisha, and for the wonderful introduction, and also to you and ILA for having me here today. Hello, everyone, and I think given that we have about 45 minutes to an hour, the idea would be to touch on some of the basics of what the law is and what it has also resulted in post-COVID. So I will not be getting into a lot of discussion on how complaints are really handled, what are the nitty-gritties around that, and the final nuances. But we'll definitely want to cover the different kinds of definitions and their usage and how much or how expansive they can be, if I can put it like that. So um, I think first things first, a lot of you, probably all of you, would be aware that when in 2013 this law was passed, the name of the law is Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace, a Prevention, Prohibition, and Redressal Act. So it's a fairly long name, but the idea is that it talks about three key things: prevention, prohibition, and redressal. So one of the most important things, therefore, it starts with the word prevention, and that's why there are certain duties that have been put under law, which needs to be complied with by organizations, by an employer, so that instances such as these could be reduced over a period of time and ultimately leads to prevention. And that's why what you're seeing on your screen right now are the key compliance requirements under law, the basic and the very minimum ones at least that one needs to do. And what this says is that if an organization has 10 or more employees, then they need to comply with all of these provisions. And when I say employees, the law doesn't say that an employer should have 10 or more women employees, you know. So it covers even organizations that may not have women. The idea being that any kind of an organization may end up doing business with women in some way or the other, and therefore each organization that has 10 or more employees must definitely comply with these provisions. Having said that, in organizations where there are lesser employees, less than 10, it's not like sexual harassment cannot happen in those organizations as well, but there are different provisions for that mentioned under law. I'm not going to be touching on that today. So let's look at what these compliance requirements are. The first thing is formulation and dissemination of a policy against sexual harassment. A lot of organizations, they either don't have a policy or refer to the act, the copy of the law itself, for internal purposes. That is something which may not be considered as a proper compliance. Some other organizations use their international policies in India as well. That may again not be considered as compliance, because the Indian law, the good part is that sexual harassment, because it's a behavior, the sexual harassment itself, would probably across the globe have similar meanings, as we see in the future slides as well. But as far as the process is concerned, the Indian law is very specific. And if you don't have an Indian specific, policy, then that compliance is going to suffer. The policy will suffer, and the employees will not get to know what they need to know as per the Indian law. So that's where the policy is at. The second thing is that the lawmakers are saying that you need to have an internal committee in place to really do these inquiries, handle complaints. The idea being that initially when the Vishaka judgment came out, or even before that, people would need to go to courts to seek redressal. And when it comes to a workplace related concern, or when it comes to the amount of the fund, the money, the resources, the time that one has, and they may have to reach out to courts, it becomes really difficult sometimes. So the idea was that there should be an internal committee at the workplace itself, which comprises of people from workplace itself, so that the complaints can be filed immediately and can be also resolved immediately. Because in a workplace, you can't keep going back to work when you have an open grievance of this nature. So it's very important that grievances are also settled absolutely immediately. And that's why having an internal committee, and it has been functional for so many years now, it's working quite beautifully. So this was a great thing that the legislators actually did. The third part is, in terms of compliance, also registering the internal committees. Uh, a lot of you would be aware that, when Vishaka guidelines came out in 1997, organizations were asked to make committees. A lot of them did not make it. Then post that in 2013, finally the law was made. And even after that, a lot of organizations were not, and still are not, complying with the law, and the committees are still not in place. So various governments, different states have come out with their own set of guidelines as well, where organizations in that jurisdiction, in that district, they need to register their internal committee, the names of committee members, and all the other details with the government, so that the government can keep track of whether the compliance has happened or not. And if the compliance has not happened, then they can levy penalties. So this is also something that is happening currently. Over and above that, two other requirements under law are that you need to, as an organization, it needs to conduct training programs for these committee members, because as I mentioned earlier, committee members are people from the organization itself, which means they could be handling different kinds of role and responsibilities. They would not necessarily know how the process will look like. And to all the lawyers that I'm talking here, if you hear the words, principles of natural justice, or civil court, or powers of civil court, or you hear examination, cross examination, these are very common things for all of us. But when you talk to any other person who does not have this kind of a background, it might be very difficult for them to even comprehend what these things could really mean and look like. So it's very important, that's why that the committee members get trained, and it's a legal, that's why a mandate under law itself. Then it says that if employees, generally all of us, wherever we are working, if we do not know the provisions of law, how are we going to, really not engage in any such behavior, even by mistake, if it happens. So it's important that organizations also create regular awareness among employees. They inform employees that, this is what the law is, this is what the policy is, and this is what, is prohibited, and this is what is considered as respectful behavior or good conduct. So those kind of awareness programs also need to be, regularly done. Apart from that, there is a little bit of paperwork, also required, and it's, it comes in the form of submission of annual reports, which have to be given to the government in, districts, the bodies in different districts at the end of the calendar year. And apart from that, the last requirement is to also have some sort of posters in place in organizations. Now, with everyone working from home, most of the organizations are putting posters, or this kind of a notice related to sexual harassment, or the names of committee members, etc., as per law, in their, either on their website, or like a email circulation. That's what is happening, as of now. So we've looked at the compliance requirements. These are, as I mentioned, these are the broad, provisions under law. Now let's try and look at some of the key terms under law, which really are the base of what this law is. And of course, the first term is going to be sexual harassment. And let's look at what the definition is across the globe. If you look at the definition of sexual harassment, as I was mentioning earlier, you will see that more or less the definition looks the same because the behavior is again can be put in the same sort of a bracket. So more or less the definitions across the globe they look the same. So there are, in terms of the definition, there are 5 types that have been mentioned under law. The first type is physical contact and advances, and I think it's a very simple one also. The law says that if there is any unwelcome behavior happening, which is of the nature of physical contact, uh, it is going to be considered as sexual harassment. It could be mean kissing somebody forcefully or probably shaking hands forcefully. You may have heard of the butt slapping case that had happened. This was Rupan Deol Bajaj's incident early in the 1990s, where her superior had slapped her on her bottom, and that again was considered as sexual harassment. So those kind of incidents will fall under that. And apart from that, while physical form of sexual harassment is a more, it's a more obvious one, the other types are not so obvious. The next one in that sense is a demand or request for sexual favors. And demand, the definition covers demand as well as request. So if you see the nuance of these 2 words, demand would typically mean some kind of a power imbalance where there is a demand coming from a senior to, probably someone who's at a lower designation or, in terms of power is at a junior position. And request would mean probably something which is a peer-to-peer relationship. And demand or request for favors, again, they do not, in the real world, they're not very easy or simple. Nobody would really actually demand very directly. So most of the complaints that come or most of the instances that occur, they are of very indirect nature. Your spouse is traveling, do you want to get together? Or I promise you I can show you a good time, or what, let's get together, I'm not going to get you pregnant. So there is no demand being made directly, but when you actually see the meaning of this sentence somewhere down the line, it means that there is some kind of an indication which is talking about a sexual favor or a sexual relationship. So those kind of instances again which are indicative of a demand would fall under sexual harassment at the workplace. The third type in this series is making sexually colored remarks. Again, something which is unwelcome, and if it's a sexually colored remark, it is going to be considered as sexual harassment. This type is a little difficult again to understand because of the sheer way that it works. It's a colored remark, which means it's not going to be absolutely crystal clear on the meaning of it. I think I can take a very common example in case if I'm taking the example from a movie because you can always go back and see it in the movie as well. There was a movie called Aetras that had come out a couple of years back, where Priyanka Chopra was, Akshay Kumar's boss, and Akshay Kumar goes to her house and to get some papers signed or something. And she comes and she kind of says that, would you like something hot or would you like something cold? Now, if we forget the scene, if any one of you can remember that scene, then you'll realize that if you actually forget the visuals and you just listen to the dialogue, you close your eyes and you listen to the dialogue, you can't make out whether it's a sexual comment or not. It could very much mean something very basic, like you treat your guests in a nice way, right? You ask them for food and drink. But when you actually see the scene, it's the visual that gives you, or the body language that gives you that understanding that, okay, you know what, no, this is not just greeting a guest, it's actually talking about something else. So that is where, sexually colored remarks, they become very gray because it's not just the words, it's literally the entire body language behind the sentences that play a role. And when these kind of instances are reported or when these kind of complaints are filed, one has to really get to the background and the context and try and understand how these sentences were said, where they came from, what did they mean, so all of that needs to be then looked at. Context becomes very important in these cases. The next one is showing pornography. I think again a very simple one. showing pornography in any form, be it through SMS, through videos, pictures, whatever it may be, electronic communication or not, it doesn't matter. Any form is going to be considered as sexual harassment if there are, any sort of inappropriate or sexual presentations happening. And the last type, we call this usually as the umbrella clause because the words used under law are any other. And the minute you say any other, it means that it could be any other. And over here, instances which do not usually get covered under the first four categories, they get covered under the fifth one. For example, staring at a person from top to bottom. Or we have this one Indian whistle that we, quite commonly hear in movies, etc. Those kind of, whistles, etc., which are used for flirting or calling out to a woman, those kind of, again, things do not get covered under the first four categories, and they get covered under the fifth one. So all of these are typically the sexual harassment types that are defined under law. As I was mentioning, the definition of sexual harassment or this behavior is, you'll see this as very common across the globe. And that also comes in the form of quid pro quo and hostile work environment. And this is a very standard, definition or a very standard, if I can say, concept. These are international concepts which are used across. Quid pro quo really means this for that. It's a Latin phrase, and the very word itself shows what it means. It shows a power imbalance. So the kind that we were discussing earlier as well. And quid pro quo usually follows from a senior to junior relationship where a person might say that, okay, you know what, you give me these favors, I'm going to ensure that your promotion happens. Or saying that, you know what, your promotion is due, don't you remember that? You better do this and I will ensure that, you get the, uh, the position that you actually, are looking at. So this is, something which is not detrimental, even a detrimental statement that, if you do not do this, I will ensure that you have to leave the organization. That will also fall under quid pro quo. So any kind of a this for that, any kind of an exchange that is being requested, that would fall under quid pro quo. Um, Hostile work environment, on the other hand, is again a little bit of a grayer concept, and usually there's a lot of misunderstanding regarding this concept as well. One is that if a group of people are sitting and talking about a completely third person, and but they're talking about that third person in a sexual manner, will that be sexual harassment? A lot of people say no because there is no discussion happening about a person in that room. However, the reality is that hostile work environment is going to cover even those instances where a group of people are talking about completely, an outsider. To give you an example, if let's say, a group of employees are talking about, let's say, a particular porn star, and they are objectifying or talking about body parts and all of that. And if there is another person who passes from there and is able to hear this conversation, they can very much raise a complaint of sexual harassment because a workplace is not meant for having discussions of this nature. Whether during working hours or after working hours, during lunch breaks, cafeterias, wherever, or just below the office during smoke breaks, it doesn't matter. The idea is that the impression that the recipient is going to get is that, okay, I mean, where am I working and what kind of a person am I working with? Or, is this what they talk about? Probably they'll be talking about me as well in some, in a similar manner. So those kind of ideas start coming into the minds of a person who's on the receiving end and is not liking that behavior. And that is why this also falls under hostile work environment. Now, also, let's look at what is not sexual harassment, because we also see that often when there is a committee, a lot of times complaints of different kinds get filed with the committee itself, because there is an internal redressal process or an internal mechanism available. However, not everything falls under sexual harassment. The line could be very thin, and I'm going to take a couple of examples to explain that. But let's look at firstly the simple one. Simply speaking, something which is happening with consent, something which is welcome, is definitely not going to be sexual harassment. Um, Over and above that, making religious or religion-based discriminatory comments, asking a person to, do extra work, or that whole overwork thing that happens, or working over the weekend that happens, or cracking jokes on a specially abled person. Any of these things could mean discrimination. They could mean workplace harassment. They could also mean bullying, but they will not automatically become sexual harassment. For anything to be sexual harassment, there has to be a quotient of sexuality in it, and that's why I said that the lines are, the line is a very very thin one. A statement can very much be a discriminatory statement or bullying, and by addition of just a word or two, it could automatically become sexual harassment. Yeah. So let's say that a comment which is made to a person that you are fat could be a biased comment or a body shaming kind of a comment. But the minute you say that, you know what, you are so fat, who the hell is going to marry you or F you? Pardon my language, but this is the only way that I could explain where it could get sexual. The minute we start crossing that line and we get into the sexuality of it, it suddenly crosses from a bullying comment to a sexually harassing comment. So that's the difference, and that's the line. Also, when a sexual harassment has happened already, or an incident of this nature has already taken place, and uh, after this incident, if there is retaliation of any kind, where the person is being given more work or is being asked to do, things that probably they do not fit that person's grade of work, or there is bullying happening, because there is retaliation. Retaliation to what? Because the person filed a complaint of sexual harassment. So now let's retaliate. If that happens, then the whole thing is going to fall under sexual harassment, including that retaliation, which could be bullying, which could not show the word sexual harassment, or that visibility does not come out, but because it's retaliation, the whole thing will come under sexual harassment. Yeah. So let's look at some quick examples to summarize this point of, or this definition of sexual harassment that we were discussing. So one of the examples is, I was with a colleague in a cafeteria and I was wearing a sleeveless top. He came to me and said, "Are you feeling cold? You have got goosebumps." Concurrent to saying this, he moved his fingers on my arm from top to bottom. So clearly, as you can see, this is an example of a physical form of sexual harassment. Yeah. Let's look at the next one. Anil repeatedly says to the student, "Preeti, if you want good grades, you must come to my house and learn some tricks from me." This is an example of a quid pro quo form of sexual harassment. So if you see here, if you want good grades, so this is the expectation, and in exchange for this, you should come to my house to learn some tricks. And this is also a real case. It's a High Court of Guwahati case, if I remember, the University of Space Force case. So this is a real one, and there were about 12, 13 instances that are recorded in that judgment. The next one is, Rita complains to IC that Mr. Mittal gives unreasonable amount of paper to photocopy and asks her to transcribe discussions done in the official phone calls, which are unfit jobs for a grade. So I was, discussing earlier that things which are probably not suited for the job, things like those, they will not typically fall under sexual harassment until and unless there is a background and context. At this stage, I must also say, before we get into the definition of workplace, to summarize the whole of sexual harassment, the term itself, every instance or every complaint of sexual harassment will need to be looked at, basis the facts and circumstances of that case itself, because sexual harassment is very subjective. It is the recipient's understanding, or the feeling that they go through. So naturally, in each case, every time one will have to look at what the complainant is actually trying to say, and then come to the conclusion as a committee whether it is actually sexual harassment or not. Yeah. Now let's look at workplace. Workplace, again, lots of understandings or beliefs or disbeliefs about this term. So I'll try and discuss a few of them. One is that what really entails workplace. Is it the physical workplace, or does it include anything else? So if you look at the definition under law, the answer is that it is not just a physical workplace where we go to work. It covers, all the other things which could be considered as an extended workplace. And when I say extended, I mean anything which is even like a farewell party, going for an offsite, camps, picnics, whatever it may be, or just going for an evening snack as well, or after office parties, those kind of things. Everything gets covered under the definition of workplace in this law, because as human beings we do not have the capacity to really put walls in our head to say that this is my workplace, this happened outside workplace, so no issues because it happened outside workplace, my work relationship will not suffer. We are not capable of doing that. Even if something untoward happens in an office party outside the workplace, we will bring that back to our work the next day because we can't suddenly forget what had happened. And that's why extended workspace is covered under this law. Also, to give you another example, transportation is also covered under the definition of workplace. So, for example, if I have to travel from Mumbai to Delhi, and let's say from my house, I take an office cab or a cab, that my office is going to reimburse. I take a cab, I sit in the flight, I go to Delhi, stay at the hotel, I do my work, come back, again, take the flight, come back with a cab, and go home. The entire thing will fall under the definition of workplace. So if anything untoward happens in the flight as well that I engage in, I do, or if I do anything in that hotel also where I'm staying in Delhi, if anyone complains about it, that will very much fall under the definition of workplace and will fall under, the behavior being done at a time when I was conducting or I was supposed to conduct duties on behalf of my organization. So it's a very, very broad, definition. Now, in the current context, let's look at whether electronic communication falls under workplace. To summarize in a nutshell, yes, it does. Because again, everybody is working from home right now or other remote locations, and the work is still happening. The work related engagements are still happening. Discussions are still happening. People are still connecting with each other, having meetings, having calls to get work done. And that's why whichever location, the person is working from, or the devices that they are using, or the platforms that they are visiting, be it say a LinkedIn or a Facebook or say Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever it may be that a person is using. I'm just taking examples here. All of those are going to be considered as visits that are made in work context, or the platforms being used for work related, for making the work easier. So in the current context, obviously, everyone is facing this challenge. Everyone that we talk to, they say that, okay, the idea of work has changed. There is sometimes no break. You don't understand, what the lines are anymore. You don't know what kind of breaks you take, whether there's any tea break or not. You don't know what your office timings are. So, you don't even know what your dress codes are anymore. So these are very real challenges which almost everybody is facing. And it has led to an understanding of a new concept now, which is either referred to as virtual workplace, remote workplace, or smart working, any of these things. And these definitely, as I was mentioning earlier, they do get covered under sexual harassment. If we now look at the definition of sexual harassment and workplace together, the only thing that in the current context for all the people who are still working from home, the only difference is that the physical form of sexual harassment, that is not happening because obviously people are not meeting each other in social distancing. But all the other forms, which is demand or request for favors, making sexually colored remarks, pornography, and any other, they still exist. And we have right now been getting complaints of different kinds where, instances are happening over a LinkedIn communication or say, a WhatsApp chat. So for example, a lot of people lost their jobs, during this time as well. And there was one incident we, got a complaint about, was where the person reached out to another, to an employee of an organization saying that, what, I'm looking for a job. Would you have any openings? And this person said, yeah, sure. I mean, why don't you get connected with me and send me your CV and everything? And obviously, this along with the CV, the phone number, the email address, all these details went to that person. And ultimately, this employee started talking, or calling the person, talking on different platforms, etc., etc. So those kind of things started happening. And ultimately, this lady who had reached out, she filed a complaint with the organization saying that this is what I had reached out for job opportunities, but the employee is behaving in an XYZ manner. So those are the kind of instances that are happening. Also, celebrations or parties are happening online now. So another complaint that we got was where a person, sorry, a person's 1 year completion at job was celebrated and had also been promoted. And another person mentioned on that this thing was happening, on a social media platform. And another person commented saying that this person obviously did not deserve the kind of credit that is being given to them. Is obviously happening because they have such a good rapport with the boss, think big, that kind of stuff. So all of these instances which are probably happening in a workplace as jokes, and people would get together and have fun. They are not okay wherever you do it, but the thing is that from there it has now shifted to the online platform. So that is the only difference. Otherwise, the whole thing has remained just the same, and those very much then do fall under sexual harassment as well. Uh, yes, I think we've already discussed this. I'm going to move on now. If we look at, does anybody have any questions before we move to the entirely next set of things?
Yeah. I had one question. This definition or of extended workplace, in the virtual sense, typically, I mean, the original definition seems to be in consonance with the with labor laws, where it says anything arising out of the course of employment. That's fine. But the new instances, do you think that that also requires an amendment in the definition, or would it come in by way of precedent?
Actually, frankly, Jamshed, they wouldn't need an amendment because the provision is so broad. It says
Right.
anything arising out of or in connection with the workplace. So, as I was mentioning that, if you're going to say a platform and you're using a platform for work or for a meeting, you are automatically doing it because it's a work requirement. It's arising out of work and it's also in connection with work. So it will very much then fall in that same category. And as you also rightly mentioned, it will depend on the precedents as well. And there are judgments of various courts which have also said that even if you are doing long distance communication, let's say using whatever internet platform, and you're working from home and you're doing these meetings or calls with your employees, that does not that does not allow you to kind of steer away from this definition and say that no, this will not apply. The definition will very much apply. I'm referring to this judgment of Saurav Malik. This is a Delhi High Court judgment that I'm referring to. So, there are judgments also in place which are already saying that instances such as these will fall under the definition of workplace.
Great, thanks.
All right. So I'm going to move forward now. I won't discuss this a lot, given that we are already at 5:30. But for anyone who wants to look at the history of the law, where it's coming from, one of the most common questions that we get is that why is the law for women? And why is it not gender neutral? There is so much discussion happening around it, to make it gender neutral. While the idea is, of course, that eventually, as the society evolves, this law will also, I'm sure, go through that change, because laws always have to catch up to what the society is going through. But if you look at the history so far, it's been a rather sad history. There have been lot of instances. We all probably know what Vishakha was like, where this woman was gang raped, and she was doing her work. She was a Satin in Rajasthan, and ultimately the NGO Vishaka filed, a PIL and said that women at work need to be safe to be able to do their work properly. Otherwise, it's going to be a challenge. And that is where it started. And while Vishaka guidelines came out in 97, after that, we didn't have a law for a very, very long time. And you would remember what had happened around 2012. I'm referring to the Nirbhaya incident, another mind-boggling incident, and finally we had this law passed. So there's a lot of history behind why it's currently for women, and eventually it will get to a space where it will also become gender neutral. Right now, with also inclusion happening for transgender persons or the LGBTQ plus community, it in fact already is making sense that it is, it needs to be kind of extended to this community also, at least. So that need is already arising. PILs are already being filed. Discussion is already happening. So it is in fact already moving in that direction. Let's look at the next one now. Who can file a complaint? Another important one. So any woman who is aggrieved can file a complaint, and this woman could be of any age, so there is no bar on that. And a very important thing is that this woman needs not necessarily be employed with the organization to file a complaint. So what I mean is that even if let's say I am an outsider, I go to a workplace and say for a meeting or for a discussion or an interview, as I was, the example I was taking earlier, and if something untoward happens there, I can very much file a complaint, because it is about the safety, security, and a healthy atmosphere, irrespective. It doesn't matter whether I work there or not. So the aggrieved can be anyone. Yeah. Especially for organizations that also have gender neutral policies. In that case, literally the aggrieved is anyone. It's not specific to then women also. It could be anybody who is coming to a workplace for any work, irrespective of their gender, and something untoward happens, they can file a complaint. So then the question is, if everyone can file a complaint, then which complaints, am I, or, the organization's internal committee required to look into? Are they supposed to look at all kinds of complaints? So, no, that is not the case. The idea is, and that's also a thumb rule, that the organization needs to handle complaints only when the complaints are against the employees of that organization, right? And the definition of employee, again, is very broad. So it includes right from, the typical gender understanding of employees is, people who are on rolls, people who get their PF, other benefits, etc., etc. But this law, for the purpose of, using the law in the best way possible, it also covers trainees, it covers consultants, it covers any person who may be working in any capacity, is whether there is any, even a written understanding with them or not, or whether it's for voluntary basis or not, it doesn't really matter as long as there is a work relationship. In fact, to the extent that it also includes contract workers. So even if an organization gets contract workers through a contractor, and this contract worker engages or there's a complaint against the contract worker, the organization's internal committee will need to look into that kind of a complaint. So that is how this whole thing, really works. Now, let's also look at who will inquire into these complaints. So this we've already discussed actually, so I think I can move on. But in a nutshell, the internal committee, as I was saying, internal committee needs to handle the complaint, and the committee comprises of a minimum of 4 people, and it needs to have one external person, because the logic over here again is that not that the committee members are not going to be neutral. It is their job to be completely unbiased, to think from both perspectives, complainant as well as respondent. But the idea is that the external member, an independent person who is not connected with the organization, will be able to bring in far more neutrality to the picture. And also sometimes when there is a lot of power imbalance happening, or if the committee is fearing some kind of challenges, or the committee members feel that their jobs might get affected, in that case, the external member role, their role becomes even more prominent, because then their, work or anything else is definitely not going to get impacted. So then they need to, ensure that they step up. But that is the entire, logic of having an external person as well. And the term of the committee has to be for 3 years. Most of you, if you are lawyers, you'll see how a lot of times when we go to court, we take a lot of time, and it is usually not so much of a time-bound process. Some cases also drag on for many, many years, and that is why under this law, the mandate that has been provided is that when a committee gets a complaint, they have to finish it in a certain period of time. So this staircase kind of a thing that you are seeing is actually the timelines under law. And they're pretty much the timelines that have to be followed by the committee. So let's look at from the very first point. If a complaint is received, then they have to, a person, whoever is on the receiving end or has found something unwelcome and they want to file a complaint, they have to do it within a period of 3 months. There is another extension that can be given for another period of 3 months, but that's at the discretion of the committee. It's not a mandatory thing. Then once the complaint has come in, it is mandatory that the copy of complaint is given to the respondent. Respondent is the person against whom the complaint is filed. And excuse me, for the mistake here, it's 7 working days, not 7 days. So within 7 working days, complaint has to be given to respondent. Respondent has to give a written response within 10 working days. And once the committee has both sides, it has to then do the inquiry or conciliation within a period of 90 days. Ultimately, once the entire inquiry has happened, examination, cross-examination, all of that has happened, then a report has to be prepared in 10 days. And finally, the report has to be submitted to management, the employer, so that the employer can take action. Employer also has to take action in 60 days. And over and above, so this is the entire internal process. Over and above this, if somebody wants to also file an appeal, is not happy with the decision taken internally, there is an appeal provision as well, which has to be done within a period of 90 days. What are the possible outcomes when the inquiry happens? It could be that the respondent is guilty. It could also be that the respondent is not guilty. It could be that the complainant has filed a false complaint, a malicious complaint, or it could be absolutely inconclusive. Though inconclusivity usually does not happen, frankly, because when a committee is doing the inquiry, it is such a thorough one that the committee usually does find some answer or the other. So inconclusive is really one of the most rarest things that can happen. And I want to also mention that when you say that the complaint is false, there has to be positive proof of the fact that the complaint is false. So, what I mean to say by this is that when sexual harassment complaints are filed, not necessarily every time there is going to be a strong evidence for it, because sexual harassment is not going to happen in front of people in public, all the time. Sometimes it can, but most of the times it's also going to happen very privately. And in those situations, there may not be any evidence. So lack of evidence will automatically not make the complaint false. There needs to be positive proof for guilt of either party, respondent or complainant. Lastly, what kind of recommendations can the committee give? The committee can, give a recommendation which may range right from written apology to warning, reprimand, withholding of promotion, termination from employment, even doing community service. So all of those are recommendations that can be given by the committee. And this will apply in either case, whether the complaint is proven as true or false. So if the complaint is true, if the guilt of respondent is found, then the respondent will be given this kind of a punishment. And if the complaint is found false, then the complainant will be given this kind of a punishment. And also there is no proper, like a table or anything which has been provided under law. One will really have to go through the complaint process, look at what kind of complaint has been filed, and only then take a decision as to what kind of recommendations will be the best for the facts and circumstances of that particular complaint. I think I'm going to end here, and if there are any more questions, maybe I can answer those.
Yeah, I had one more. I believe, is it true that till date, there has not been an appellate authority that has been notified under the Act. That is, it's supposed to be the labor
That's a very
court.
twisted one, actually. Yes. So there's a sorry, but a twisted answer to this. The law is
Right.
saying that there's a section 18 under law which is saying that
Right.
appellate authority will be that body which has been notified as per the Employee Standing Orders Act. And as you know, that's a 1946 Act. So after that, whichever body has been authorized as the appellate authority, that has to be the appellate authority for this also. So for each state, it is going to be different. And usually for Mumbai, it is, yes, the labor court, but there is still lack of clarity because I have heard, both ways. I've heard where courts have taken the matter also, and I've also heard instances where courts have not taken the matter. So frankly, it's a little unclear still, and we don't have a copy of the notification either. And every time we have asked or filed RTIs or whatever it is that we could have done, we have still not found the solution to this. Any other questions?
I think
Okay.
that's it then.
All right. I think we are good. Yeah. Back to you, Subhisha.
Thank you, Shivangi, for taking out the time for us. This is really informative.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.